At the height of the Cold War, when tensions between the East and West were teetering on the edge of chaos, and nuclear paranoia ran hot through the veins of military strategists across the globe, one jet suddenly pierced the iron veil of secrecy and sent shockwaves through the corridors of NATO and the Pentagon alike. A beast of brutal speed and raw aggression known as the MiG-25 Foxbat. This Soviet-built monster, cloaked in mystery and powered by fearsome twin R-15B-300 turbojets, was a jet like nothing the West had ever encountered before, flying at a blistering Mach 2.8. Some even say it could push beyond Mach 3 in desperate sprints. The MiG-25 wasn't just fast. It was a symbol of Soviet defiance and power, and it absolutely terrified Western defense officials who scrambled to understand, match, and defeat it. The first true glimpse the West got came in the late 1960s when reconnaissance satellites and radar stations picked up a high-speed aircraft operating at insane altitudes, zooming across the Soviet skies. Analysts believe the USSR had developed a super fighter that could obliterate anything in the sky. This perception was reinforced when the Foxbat's wingspan, fuselage, and radar signature were studied by U.S. intelligence. Its massive airframe and towering twin fins suggested a dominant interceptor capable of outrunning and outgunning any NATO aircraft. Panic set in. Could the MiG-25 intercept and destroy the U.S.'s most prized strategic asset, the State Route 71 Blackbird? Could it challenge American air superiority? These were questions that haunted American defense circles, and the result was a frantic push to develop a counter, which would later birth the legendary F-15 Eagle. But let's take a step back. What exactly was a MiG-25 Foxbat, and why did it send the West into a frenzy? Born from Soviet fears of American high-altitude bombers like the B-58 Hustler and the XB-70 Valkyrie, the MiG-25 was designed to fly fast, fly high, and intercept intruders before they could strike Soviet soil. Its mission profile was not to dogfight, but to scream into action, fire long-range missiles, and disappear before any enemy could respond. It was built largely of stainless steel, a strange choice in a world of titanium and composites, but one that gave it the structural toughness needed to handle the skin-melting heat generated at near Mach 3 speeds. This decision made the aircraft heavy, but it didn't matter. Speed was a Foxbat superpower. It was capable of altitudes above 80,000 feet and equipped with an incredibly powerful radar, the Smerche, which, despite being relatively crude and analog, could burn through jamming and lock onto targets dozens of miles away. Its R-40 missiles were like flying telephone poles, gigantic and deadly, with infrared and radar-guided variants designed to knock even the highest flying enemy out of the sky. But the Foxbat's true weapon was psychological. Western planners believed they were looking at a Soviet superplane, a ghost that could climb, kill, and vanish faster than anything in the U.S. inventory. The panic wasn't just academic. It was real, urgent, and expensive. In response, the United States ramped up development of the F-15 Eagle, pouring billions into building a fighter that could outfly and outfight anything in the sky. The Eagle's design was directly shaped by the threat of the MiG-25. It had to be fast, maneuverable, and lethal. But as the U.S. raced to meet the threat, something unexpected happened. In 1976, a Soviet pilot named Viktor Belenko defected with his MiG-25 to Japan, handing over the aircraft to Western analysts. When American engineers finally got their hands on a jet that had haunted their nightmares, they were stunned, not by its power, but by its primitiveness. The Foxbat, it turned out, was a brute, a raw engine with wings. Its avionics were vacuum tube-based. Its construction was rugged but rudimentary, and its maneuverability was shockingly poor at lower altitudes. It was not a dogfighter. It wasn't even meant to be. The Foxbat was an interceptor, pure and simple, built to chase down high-flying targets, not tangle with agile jets. Still, its raw speed and altitude performance remained impressive. Even though it didn't live up to the worst fears, it had done its job. It scared the West into overdrive, triggered a new generation of fighters, and reshaped air combat strategy on both sides of the Iron Curtain. The MiG-25 service record was as intriguing as its design. During the Yom Kippur War of 1973, Soviet-piloted Foxbats conducted reconnaissance flights over Israel with total impunity. Israeli and American fighters scrambled but couldn't catch them. The MiG-25 simply outran everything. The Foxbat also served with the Iraqi Air Force and was used in combat against Iran during the Iran-Iraq War. One Iraqi MiG-25 pilot, Zuhair Dawood, even claimed a kill on Iranian F-5 and later became known for successfully shooting down Iranian F-4 Phantom, a rare air-to-air kill for Foxbat. But despite these moments of success, the aircraft's limitations became clearer with time. In actual combat, especially in lower altitude scenarios, the MiG-25 was a blunt instrument, extremely fast, yes, but not agile, and not built for close encounters. The US and NATO learned to work around its strengths and exploit its weaknesses. Still, no one could deny that when the Foxbat lit its afterburners and screamed into stratosphere, it remained one of the most awe-inspiring sights in aviation history. Even today, decades after its introduction, the MiG-25 commands respect. It forced the U.S. to think faster, design smarter, and fly higher. It was one of the last aircraft of its kind, designed in an era when raw speed and altitude were considered the ultimate edge in combat. It became the spark that ignited a new arms race in the skies and redefined the role of interceptors and reconnaissance platforms for generations. The Foxbat may not have been perfect, but it was iconic. It was a warning, a challenge, and a statement. Soviet engineers had pulled off something astonishing with the limited resources and technology of their time. They built a jet that could outclimb and outspeed nearly anything that dared challenge it. And while it didn't live up to the myth the West had built around it, the myth itself had power, enough to change the course of fighter jet development for decades. The Foxbat's legacy lived on the MiG-31, its sleeker, smarter successor, but nothing ever quite replaced the raw, untamed energy of the MiG-25. It was born to hunt, born to race, and born to terrify. For a time, it did exactly that. And even now, when we look back at the silent Cold War battles fought in the sky, the MiG-25 Foxbat will forever be remembered as the Soviet jet that terrified the West and changed the game. Yet the tale of the MiG-25 Foxbat doesn't end with its Cold War terror. Instead, it spirals deeper into the hidden layers of global air warfare, Soviet ambition, and the enduring legend of one of the fastest jets ever to scorch the sky. After the defection of Victor Belenko and the ensuing dissection of his aircraft, Western analysts were left with a dual feeling: relief at its technological limitations and stunned admiration for its design audacity. It became clear that the Soviet doctrine of air combat diverged drastically from the West. Not every fighter needed to dance in the skies like an F-16. Some just had to launch, intercept, and disappear like a phantom. The Foxbat was a tool of fear, a statement jet, and a high-speed chess piece meant for strategic psychological warfare, as much as tactical engagement. But despite the surprise over its analog internals and massive airframe, there was still one feature that remained undisputed. Its sheer speed was unparalleled. The MiG-25's engines, though finicky and prone to wear when pushed to their limits, gave it the ability to streak across vast distances in mere minutes, reaching and maintaining speeds that would tear apart lesser airframes. Soviet pilots were trained to use it surgically. Hit the afterburners, climb beyond 70,000 feet, fire missiles at strategic bombers or spy planes, and return before enemy fighters could even vector to intercept. It was less a fighter and more a strategic defensive sword, meant to shield Soviet skies from American intrusion, particularly from reconnaissance platforms like the U-2 and State Route 71, and in that role, it succeeded admirably. But the Foxbat's reign didn't remain confined to Soviet borders. As it was exported to allies and client states, the aircraft began making appearances in some of the world's most volatile regions. Iraq, Syria, Algeria, and Libya all acquired MiG-25s. It wasn't long before the Foxbat found itself in the middle of real dogfights and tense international incidents. In 1981, Israeli F-15 shot down a Syrian MiG-25 over Lebanon, proving that in a modern combat environment, agility, avionics, and tactics could overcome sheer speed. Yet even with these losses, the MiG-25 continued to hold an aura of danger. When the Gulf War erupted in 1991, Iraq's MiG-25s once again appeared, and though they were outdated by that time, and outclassed by American aircraft like the F-15 and F-117, they still managed to score at least one dramatic kill. On December 30th, 2002, during a tense period of no-fly zone enforcement, an Iraqi MiG MiG-25 fired a missile and downed a U.S. Navy F-18 Hornet flown by Lieutenant Commander Scott Spiker. It was a stunning moment. Proof that even a Cold War relic in the hands of a skilled pilot could still reach out and strike down a modern American jet. That incident reignited conversations about the Foxbat's lingering threat. It wasn't just a museum piece. It was a warbird with claws, and even in its old age, it could bite. While the world moved on to stealth fighters, drones, and beyond visual range combat, the MiG-25 remained a curious relic of a different era. But let's not forget what it represented. A Soviet approach to warfighting built on raw power and intimidation. The Foxbat didn't rely on stealth. It didn't need to. It was designed to show up on your radar screaming like a banshee, daring you to react in time, and often you simply couldn't. And then there was its cousin, the MiG-31 Foxhound, a direct descendant of the MiG-25, built to address many of its predecessors' shortcomings. The MiG-31 kept the speed, kept the altitude, but added a powerful phase array radar and the ability to engage multiple targets at once. It could fly lower, faster, with more precision, and it was still dangerous well into the 21st century. But while the Foxhound was the evolutionary improvement, it lacked the primal fear factor that the Foxbat inspired. There was something mythical about the MiG-25. It looked like a rocket ship. It sounded like thunder, and it felt like a warning shot across the bow of Western technological supremacy. No matter how advanced the F-15 or the Eurofighter became, there was always a footnote. Remember the Foxbat, and what of the pilots who flew it? Soviet aviators trained for MiG-25 were a breed apart. Operating at those speeds and altitudes wasn't just demanding, it was dangerous. A single mistake could destroy the aircraft. The Foxbat wasn't graceful. It was brute force. Pilots spoke of the violence of acceleration, the crushing climb, and the sense of almost weightless silence at 80,000 feet, with the sky turned black and earth curved below. It wasn't flying, it was rocketing. And while it wasn't agile, that didn't mean it was helpless. In the hands of a confident pilot, the Foxbat could be devastating. High-speed dives, energy retention maneuvers, and hit-and-run missile strikes were all part of its brutal playbook. One Soviet training manual reportedly warned pilots not to push the aircraft past Mach 2.8 unless it was life or death, as speeds beyond Mach 3 could cause engine failures or structural damage. But in combat, limits are often suggestions, not rules. Many pilots pushed the Foxbat to its edge, and the aircraft, to its credit, held together when it counted. In the grand mosaic of fighter jet history, the MiG-25 is a jagged shard of brilliance, rough, sharp, and unforgettable. It wasn't refined like the F-22. It wasn't surgical like the F-35. It was a hammer. And sometimes a hammer is exactly what a nation needs. The West spent decades building jets that could outthink, outturn, and outshoot their enemies. The Soviets built a jet that simply outran the problem. In that simplicity lay its genius. Even its construction reflected this mindset. Where the U.S. was developing fly-by-wire control systems, stealthy surfaces, and digital glass cockpits, the Foxbat stuck with steel plates, analog gauges, and vacuum tubes that, ironically, gave it superior resilience against nuclear EMPs. It was behind the times and ahead of them, a contradiction flying at 3 times the speed of sound. And that's what made it terrifying. You couldn't predict it. You couldn't match it in its element. You could only react and hope. Even as Russia moved toward modern aircraft like the Su-57, echoes of the MiG-25 philosophy remain in Russian doctrine. Speed, surprise, and power. The Foxbat's legend also survived in the public imagination. It starred in books, video games, and military documentaries, always cast as a mysterious beast roaring across radar screens and vanishing before anyone could touch it. And let's not forget the cinematic portrayals. It inspired the fictional Firefox, jet in Clint Eastwood's 1982 film of the same name, where an American pilot steals a Soviet superjet with thought-control weapons, a thinly veiled tribute to fear the MiG-25 once instilled. That mythos matters because it wasn't just the jet's performance that made it terrifying. It was the idea of it. In military history, perception can be more dangerous than firepower, and the MiG-25's greatest success wasn't measured in kills, but in the anxiety it caused and the ripple effects it triggered in Western aerospace development. Today, a handful of MiG-25 still exist in flyable condition, primarily for high-altitude research or retired pilots' nostalgia flights, but they are no longer the threat they once were. And yet, when one lights up the engines and tears down a runway, there's still that sense of awe, that deep, visceral respect for what it represents. It's a machine from a time when the world feared a war that never quite came, when the roar of a jet over the horizon could send generals scrambling and budgets exploding. The MiG-25 may not have lived up to the darkest fears the Pentagon once had, but it didn't need to. It did its job by merely existing. It forced the West to look harder, dig deeper, and build better. It reshaped strategies, inspired technologies, and stood as a symbol of a nation willing to bet big on speed and strength. And in the end, that's why it deserves its place in the pantheon of legendary aircraft. This was not just a fighter. It was a Cold War weapon of intimidation, a juggernaut of jet propulsion, and a thunderous answer to American aerial dominance. The MiG-25 Foxbat remains one of the few aircraft in history that altered the course of aerospace development across the globe, not by what it did in combat, but by what it threatened to do. Its speed made it immortal. Its legacy made it feared. And for one unforgettable moment in the skies, it made the West stop, stare at the radar, and wonder if they were already too late. But to truly understand the MiG-25 Foxbat's impact, one must look beyond just its technical specifications or battlefield history. It's about the seismic shock it delivered to the global balance of air power the moment it was revealed. The very fact that Western intelligence, with all its sophisticated spy planes and satellite coverage, had so massively overestimated the Foxbat's capabilities was itself a Cold War failure that rattled the Pentagon to its core. After Belenko's defection and the U.S. dismantling of his Foxbat, top analysts realized that the Soviet Union had built a beast not to engage in close air combat, but to win wars of perception. This jet, forged of nickel steel rather than cutting-edge composites, with engines that needed replacement every 150 hours, was never meant to go toe-to-toe with F-15 Eagles in a dogfight. It was meant to obliterate high-flying reconnaissance planes and demoralize Western defense planners. In that mission, it succeeded flawlessly, and it pushed the U.S. to react with an intensity rarely seen, prompting not only upgrades to the F-15, but giving birth to future air dominance programs that would ultimately lead to stealth fighters like the F-22 Raptor. If not for the perceived threat of the MiG-25, the timeline of American air superiority evolution might have looked very different. Meanwhile, back in the USSR, the MiG-25 wasn't just an asset. It was a symbol. Soviet propaganda paraded it as a pinnacle of communist engineering, a Mach 3 miracle capable of defending the motherland from any aerial threat. Test flights broke speed records, altitudes records, and even world aviation records for time to climb, many of which still stand unbroken to this day. Soviet pilots trained in secrecy, preparing for scenarios involving U.S. State Route 71 Blackbirds or B-52 bombers entering Soviet airspace.